Okay, so for our third presentation that we do, we have Lauren Alpert doing A Legacy of Imperium, 3 authors' portrayals of Indian families in the post-colonial world.
Hi, so as Zonza said, I'm Lauren. I'm an English major. I'm actually graduating in a week. And so this is sort of the capstone to my entire educational experience here at Chief of State. And the 3 authors that I'm dealing with are Arundhati Roy, doing The God of Small Things, Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children, and Jhumpa Lahiri's The Namesake. The way that I got into this area of study was while studying abroad, actually, and it's not necessarily a huge area of literature study right now in the United States. It's getting bigger. It's newer because it's all modern writers. It's all people that are alive and writing right now, and it's talking about the modern post-colonial experience. So it was something that obviously was dealt with in Ireland a lot because they are a post-colonial nation of Britain, as is India. So that was how I got interested in it originally, and then last semester I happened to take an honors theme class that was about globalization and landscape and literature, and we read 2 of the novels in that course. So we read The Namesake and The God of Small Things in that course, and it ended up fitting well with all the stuff I'd already been studying. It's hard to do justice to my thesis in 10 minutes, since it is a 70-page piece at this point. So what I decided to do was read you my introduction, because it's only 2 pages long, so I'm going to give you an overview of what I talk about in my thesis by reading this little section of it. Stories are history reworked, viewed through a different lens, sculpted to present a new viewpoint about real, palpable events. As writers of fiction, authors capture historical movements and times of turbulence and present them not through renderings of whole societies, but as individuals and families to make them more realistic for their readers. In the act of making fiction from true events, our sense of time, landscape, and reality are all put into new perspectives as they create the worlds of their characters. Roy's storyline falls back and forth between past, present, and everything in between. Rushdie's narrator's skin crumbles as India's independent state falters, and Lahiri tells her story through many different eyes, with the views being represented through different lenses pertaining to different characters. By reading these stories and placing them into their historical perspective, we'll see the persistent and lingering effects of Britain's encroachment on India. We'll recognize where the post-colonial world originated and see the author's visions as to where it is now heading. Each story follows the continuing histories of families as they try to patch together the fractured pieces of their lives within nations that are still struggling for that ever-elusive sense of unity. As India fell under British rule and then, after over 100 years, subsequently pulled itself out of the colonial kingdom, its inhabitants seized a chance to reclaim their identities. They could no longer be the India that was before the British, but they could also no longer be the India that was before them. The country was now surviving in a dualist state, where its citizens were grappling with thousands of years of history that had now been punctuated by British control. By looking at texts written by modern Indians, we get a window into colonial and post-colonial India, through which we can see how the Indian people are striving to form their identities now that the whites have gone. The novels dealt with in this thesis are, as I said, The God of Small Things, Midnight's Children, and The Namesake. And while the novels are not dealt with in chronological order, their placement is intended to follow India from under Britain's wing and out into the world as an independent nation. Dealing with the novels more specifically, in The God of Small Things, we follow a pair of 2-egg twins, as Roy so aptly describes them. They are 2 different people brought into the world at the same time, about 20 years after India's independence on August 15, 1947. And by representing her main points with these 2-egg twins, she's also representing the 2 faces of India that were prevalent in the world at the time of their birth. There was the generations that had lived through or lived during the occupation and through independence, and now there were the generations coming about in a free India. And so with these 2 twins, she represents the struggles to love themselves as they are and to love each other as the older generations and the new generations clash over modern Indian politics. And then in Rushdie's Midnight's Children, I wanted to give a little bit of a closer look at how I interpret and analyze these works in my own way. And so I'm just going to read a really short excerpt from that chapter of this thesis to kind of show you the way that I work with literature. So in Midnight's Children, we follow the main character, the narrator Salim Sinai, who is born at the moment of India's independence. So he's born at midnight, August 15, 1947. And he is forever connected with India in that way. The way that Rushdie describes it, it is that Salim is India and India is Salim. So as things happen to the country, equally big things happen to Salim the person. And it's told through the eyes of Salim in his adulthood. And so this is kind of an introduction to Salim. As Salim explains, I've been a swallower of lives, and to know me, just the one of me, you'll have to swallow the lot as well. Showing that we aren't in for a play-by-play of what happens to Salim as something similar happens to India. What we are in for is stories within stories within stories. An unending path through the stable birth of a nation as represented by Salim, his family, their friends, their enemies. As we start long before Salim's birth, and then move on to his childhood and early adult years, all the while looking through the lens of our adult Salim narrator, we're able to take a step back and observe all of these events as the long history of India and its freedom tangle around and into the lives of Rushdie's characters. This produces a work that attempts to encapsulate as much of the shared experience of India as one novel can handle. Salim often questions the validity of his memories, the source of his narrative, since the complication of representing the entire modern history of a country of 600 million, by showing us the experience of one family is nothing if not daunting. In fact, he wonders, is this an Indian disease, this urge to encapsulate the whole of reality, and worse, am I infected too? Openly giving us a different vantage point for taking in the novel. Is this how someone else would represent India's history, or are we getting one skewed for Salim's own purposes? The narration becomes unreliable at many points, but really, who can say that there's ever a completely balanced and unbiased history of any country, let alone one as enduring and ancient as India? And so from this novel where we go from a generation before the independence all the way through the independence and into relatively modern times, since the novel was written in 1985, we then move on to the namesake, which is pretty much set in today. It ends in 2003, so very recent times. And what it does is it follows two generations also, one generation that was born in India and comes to America, and then the children that they raise here in America. And it looks at how the characters of the novel try to deal with the duality of their lives, the whiter side and the Indian side, in a different country. And so it shows the overwhelming, wide-sweeping, widespread effects of colonialism and how it plays a role in the global world. And one thing that, mostly what I wanted to end on actually, is a quote by Rushdie, who's actually one of the go-to people when you're talking about this type of literature, where in one of his novels dealing with post-colonialism and its effects as they affect other nations and Indians living in other nations, and he says that our physical alienation from India almost inevitably means that we will not be capable of reclaiming precisely the thing that was lost. That we will, in short, create fictions, not actual cities or villages, but invisible ones, imaginary homelands, Indias of the mind. And so I use that in my conclusion to really illustrate how each of these novels attempts to create a new India in a way that can be experienced everywhere in the world, no matter who you are, because India itself has come to encapsulate so many different people, lives, and cultures.